Hi, this is Ted Price from Insomniac Games, and on today's episode, I have a great chat with Siobhan Reddy, who is the studio director at Media Molecule. Siobhan goes into depth on how Media Molecule supports community, culture, content, creativity. In particular, we talk a lot about user-generated content and how their upcoming title, Dreams, can really supercharge user self-expression, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion. Please join me for a very special talk with Siobhan.
Welcome to The Game Maker's Notebook, a podcast featuring a series of in-depth one-on-one conversations between game makers providing a thoughtful, intimate perspective on the business and craft of interactive entertainment. The Game Maker's Notebook is presented by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, a member-driven organization dedicated to the recognition and advancement of interactive entertainment.
Siobhan, it is awesome to have you here.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
And here, by the way, for all of our listeners, is E3.
Mm-hmm.
So how long did it take you to get here?
10 and a half hours on the plane. I think
Okay.
that's about it, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Nice, smooth flight. No dramas. Just what you want on an aeroplane.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So is this a yearly trip for you? Do you come to every single E3?
Pretty much. It all just depends whether or not we're showing anything. But Sony have a sort of little conference that happens after E3 for the Worldwide Studios team. So even if I haven't come to E3, I tend to come over at some point for that, so we can sort of catch up with the other Worldwide Studios groups and see what's going on. But I love it because it's like, you get to see everybody, I guess, like putting their best foot forward and showing their games. And so it's that moment where you get to, just have a look at what everybody's up to. And, there's all those range of emotions that everyone's going through. So if we're not showing, I like to be like the cheerleader party. And then, here with the friends of ours that aren't showing, our cheerleader party. So it's good. It's a good week.
Do you come back with ideas for new games or things that you want to do with, say, Dreams or?
Yeah, every single one. I remember actually one of the E3s many years ago with LBP, we actually visited Insomniac. And that's one of the things that I love to do wherever we go, is be able to go visit studios, because that's one of the ways you learn lots of things, like weird things, like what kind of chairs do you have? It's like dumb things like that, or like what's the seating plan, or
Those
like how do you actually?
They
are incredibly important things, but I guess they're the things that you don't. Yeah, they're the things that I love finding out. Like particularly like how do people communicate within studios. So that's one of the things that I love to do when I'm visiting. And so yeah, I was very grateful when you allowed us to visit all those years ago. And I think other things for the game would be that thing of, we're meeting people. So today we've been showing different dev teams the tools. We've been showing them like the audio tools. So I think we actually showed your sound designers earlier as well.
Right.
And like that's another thing, because when you get that kind of direct feedback, you are able to then sort of take that back. And plus, there's nothing like watching people play your game. And obviously we do the user testing and usability testing, but that's all about like finding problems. Whereas at a thing like E3, it's more about gauging what people like and where they're at, like what, it's a different type of demo. And so you come away from that just, always thinking, oh, right, okay, yeah, maybe let's do more of that, less of that. So it's, always lots to learn.
Well, I remember when you showed off LittleBigPlanet for the first time, and it was at a judges event prior to E3, and I was walking by where you guys had your stuff spread out. I was just stunned at how beautiful the game was and how different it was from anything else that was around. And I remember sitting down with, I think it was Alex, and he was talking about shaders and how you guys were actually pulling off these incredibly realistic surfaces. And what struck me was that, as you pointed out, Media Molecule was very willing and open to share. Just everybody I met was willing to say, oh, this is how we did X, Y, Z. Do you find that that's for you very common? Are people, your compatriots here in the US and over in Europe, also willing?
I think actually, a lot of that comes from the Bullfrog days. So certainly in Guildford in the early days when I moved there sort of 20 years ago, it was sort of the Bullfrog Lionhead folks who were the most open. So, and particularly like Alex and Mark, like I've known them a long time, and they were always the people that would be like, I'm working on this cool thing, I want to show you. So they're not in any way scared to share their ideas or to share the technology that they're building, because ultimately they actually have always liked building tools for people. And I remember in the, in those sort of early phases where we'd be talking about things like confidentiality of like people not, or whether or not the studio would be like open for people to visit. And like at we have a pretty much like, we're very okay with people's families coming in. Like everyone's done the NDA and everything. So obviously it's all still, keeping things professional.
Right.
But at the same time, what we've kind of realized is that like ideas are one thing and execution is another. And actually the sharing of ideas is a really joyful thing. And like from that, lots of new things spark. And so, yeah, that's definitely been part of the genesis of Media Molecule. And I don't know whether or not it was the Bullfrog days really, or whether or not like Mark and Alex have just always been like that as people. Certainly have been ever since I've known them. And I think that means that when people get to know them, it's contagious. So yes, like a lot of the people that we know are then therefore very happy to share with us, because they know we're not going to like take their ideas, or we're just going to celebrate the fact that they're trying to do something. And that's one of my favorite things of the industry, is when you can actually get to the point where you're talking properly and not dancing around the subjects. So yeah, I think it is a really, like even recently with all VR happening, like I thought that was really amazing to see how much everyone was just so willing to share what they were doing.
Right.
That's how we keep developing, is when we're not afraid to talk.
Indeed. And I think if all developers share, then we all win. And sometimes I think when people look into our industry from the outside, there's this assumption that we're cutthroat competitors. But the reality is we're all creators.
Yeah, right.
We just were interested in satisfying our fans and telling these stories. And if we can do it better by helping each other, that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I as you say that, I think, yeah, every time I meet people and I get to see their game, I always think of it as it's so awesome to meet this person who's had this idea and want to celebrate what they're doing.
That's a great point. It's that celebration. And it's, I think too, and you got to tell me if you think this is right. When you see another developer working hard on trying to ship something that really is unique, you understand, because you've been through it before.
Yep.
And do you, as a result, do you find yourself kind of offering advice or trying to help them overcome these obstacles?
I think like one of my favorite stories of this year has been Guerrilla and Horizon. Because I wish there was awards for studio who takes on new genre and nails it first back out of the gate. Like their shift from Killzone to Horizon is so spectacular. And they are a really accomplished team. So it wasn't about ever offering advice to them, but certainly cheerleading, because, I felt like, I love the Guerrilla team. But I think that just seeing them make that massive transformation to that new amazing game was just, was really, every time I saw them, I was always like, cheering for them.
I'm sure that makes a big difference.
Well,
because it's your peers, right? Somebody who you respect, and if they're saying, "Hey, you guys are doing great. This is amazing."
Yeah. Well, yeah. We have a mutual love between the Molecule and Guerrilla. So yeah. I think then otherwise, like it's always. It's hard. I always find it hard to. I don't know. It's hard to give advice all the time, because I feel every game that we make is really it's very particular to, like, the way we work is very particular to us, and the types of games we make are very particular to us. Our situation within Sony is really unique, also. And so all these things, I always feel like, I don't know. I don't know how to. So yeah, I don't know. I try to offer support and encouragement, basically. And I guess talk about the fact that I actually know that it's hard. And so I know that when you're trying to come up with a new IP or you're trying to do something new, everybody has those days where they just lose faith And it's really, really easy. And particularly when you're in the middle of the middle of the middle,
yes.
like that's like the worst place to be because you just can't see land. And it's like there's no wind and you're just like, oh God, how are we gonna and but I think, you know, anyone doing something new, we've all been at that moment and had to then figure out how to keep going.
Also, I think this is a great time to talk about creating a new IP. And Media Molecule has created some of the most interesting and different IP that has existed on console or VR or any platform. So what is your process as a team for coming up with new ideas and then paring things down until you have the one that you feel is right for Media Molecule?
So I think this also goes back to the early days. So Bullfrog, so part of the studio, so Alex and Mark are ex-Bullfrog, so working on like Dungeon Keeper and Magic Carpet and all the, you know, Theme Hospital, which never gets mentioned, but it's like one of the coolest games in the whole world. They were there. My boyfriend was there also, and he has spoken to me a lot over the years about their very ground-up methodology they had there of like just trying out, playing with tech and design and sort of seeing what grew. And I came from the Criterion angle where we had been working on the Burnout series and had actually worked on, the first game I worked at Criterion was Airblade, like a hoverboarding game. And then I saw through the Criterion, like my time at Criterion, I joined the Burnout team when we were making Burnout 3. And that was sort of the point where from Burnout 2 to Burnout 3 was its moment where it was being published by EA, and also was the one where we really kind of needed it to be like a commercial and critical success. And we sort of really went through that process of it sort of turning from like a racing game, which people really loved, to Burnout 3, which was really successful and like, you know, people's sort of the first sort of the breakout hit for the series. And that was really much a part of like kind of learning how to really focus on a couple of important gameplay decisions and then amplifying them to like the power of a billion. And that was kind of the process of Burnout. So when we came, and so then the guys moved from Bullfrog to Lionhead, and I was at Criterion. And then we got to this point where we started to work together on LBP at Media Molecule, and I think we were kind of all in the perfect place. I had been in like shipping world and in this sort of almost like crafting a pop song world. And the
crafting a pop song.
Yeah, that's kind of how I sort of think about Burnout. Like it was like a perfect pop song.
Wow.
They were making these amazing, like, you know, games of like black and white. And so then when we came together, I think we had these two different ways of working. I really wanted framework and kind of top down, and they wanted the ground up.
Okay.
And so together we sort of have this process where it is, and I also wanted to explore ground up a lot more because that was something we didn't do. That wasn't really the part of the Criterion process as much. And so when we came together, it was this idea of like, well, how do we, within this small team, make sure that the ground up approach of tinkering and trying out new ideas can then have a framework that sort of pushes it through so that everything fits together. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
But I think everybody would interpret it differently, right? So when you make a statement like that and when you work with the team, do you say, okay, this is how the process is going to work. We're going to establish a framework. It's going to consist of these things and we're going to fill in the blanks. Or is it something different?
I think in those early days of LBP, we established the framework of the game really early on of like, what is the flow going to be and what is the loop going to be? Like, you know, you go to your pod, you go to levels, you collect things, you know, on the simplest basis. But we had that as part of our vertical slice for LBP. LBP came together like shockingly smoothly. It's like a one in a lifetime like experience. But I think it was because we were just at that moment. And the idea itself, like a lot of the things worked together in terms of, you know, wanting to make a user-generated content game based on physics. David Smith had already made this amazing little physics prototype. And that we went into making LBP with. So we had that. And that was, but if you look at that now, it is, that is Sackboy. It's like 2D Sackboy essentially. And then from that, it was like, well, if you're going to do physics, well, then it kind of needs to be real materials. So like enter the craft materials. And then Alex, being the genius that he is, and Anton also being a genius, like we're like, well, then we need to make it look realistic. And just like all these sort of things ended up like really, fitting together really well. But yeah, that framework, because I was very like, we need the framework, we need the loop, because in Burnout, it's all about like, the risk and the reward and, doing these things and then getting these things and feeling amazing. So I kind of came at it from that angle of like, we have to make sure that players are going on this journey. So yeah, we did talk about that. And then I'm like, I don't know, I can't remember in other projects.
Well, let's talk about Dreams a little bit. So Dreams is another approach to UGP, right?
Yeah.
Or UGC, sorry. Yeah. And it's how... But to me, it seems even broader, an even broader sort of palette that you're offering players. How did that come about?
So that started from the point where at the end of us making LittleBigPlanet 2, we wanted to stay within UGC, but we knew that we needed to sort of sidestep where we'd got to with LBP. I love LBP, really, really, really proud of it. But it wasn't, but what we wanted to do next was something that really enabled people to actually get, for us to develop like sound tools, art tools, to the point where we weren't so constrained by the visuals. If like LBP, it's constraints where it's beauty, but it's not surprising that after you work on something that has those constraints, you just want to take off the, shackles of constraint and go completely broad. But an interesting thing there was also like talking to the team. The art team really wanted to see their own styles up on the screen. And we went to a Sony, yearly meeting, and Anton Mikolov, who did the Move controllers, he did a demo of this sort of Move controller painting thing that he'd been working on. And we were like, we need to talk to him. So we actually chased him onto the train to track him down to talk to him, and he ended up coming and working with us. But what we were sort of working at that point was just this idea of, we were looking at sculpting, we were using the moves, but it started at that point of wanting it to be able to really be able to be more than to be able to really let people see their work, hear their style up on the screen. And it was incredibly ground up for that first year. And like with with Dreams, we only had a very, very small team on it for the first couple of years. So yeah, we started with that. And then gradually, as different people in the team became available, that's when we started to develop like the other aspects. But I think we needed at one point to not have that framework so that we could truly experiment and get to the point where we actually had the tools, and we always knew that we would make a game with it, and we always knew that it would probably eventually end up with the same framework as LBP, but we kind of needed to almost like step completely away from LBP for a while in order to like refresh the mind.
Sure.
Because we've been living and breathing it for so long. And at that same time, Tearaway was happening. That was kind of those years as well.
Well, given that it seems like you're taking an even larger step into this create your own world idea. Was there any scoping that you had to do? Because to me, as a viewer, it looks like you can do pretty much anything. And it's as a developer, it's almost intimidating. It's very intimidating to look at that and go, wow, how do you do that?
It's been insane. But yeah, so much scoping. So I mean the Dreams has been really fascinating. So the other thing I sort of forgot to mention was it was always called Dream right from the beginning, and it was always about this idea of quick creation. That means like dreams, they're fleeting. You want to be able to get it out onto the screen as quickly as possible for it to be as mad as you like.
Right.
And so that was always like a core principle. And we had this idea of performance being the principle. So if we think of like a music jam, it's really easy to get lost and make happy accidents, and those happy accidents becoming the thing. So like happy accidents, serendipity, performance, these were all these sorts of words we were using right back then. And but to get to tools that allow that, there's like a really long journey in the middle. And but I always think that, when Alex announced Dreams and did the PS4 announce, the words that he said there were very much what we were aiming to do. And I think with Dreams, there's been times where I have really wanted to get into that kind of edit mode of like, okay, now we need to scope and ship. Okay, come on, let's scope and ship. And actually you realize that like the vision is what's important. You can't half deliver a vision. You know that, like that's one of the toughest parts of the job, when you actually realize how big the vision is.
Right.
And so it's been really important for us to it's been important to like scope in the right ways and not sort of do those false economy scoping where you're like, we're going to remove this whole feature, or we're not going to do these things that we need to do because we're worried that, because we're just wanting to get to that edit phase faster. And obviously like our community and everybody and Sony have been like incredibly patient as we've been going through this process. So obviously we want to do it, but at the same time, we also want to make sure when we deliver, it's delivering on that vision that we set out. And so there's been big moments where we've looked at like, like online multiplayer would be one of the obvious things. Like that was initially part of our plan. But at one point we're like, let's just do that later. If it's a service, we've got like beyond day one, we don't have to put everything in there. So it's a kind of constant sort of at this stage, we're at that granularity scoping. So everything's kind of like we're constantly kind of trimming off like what do we really, 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 really need to ship with. And
so I have a culture question for you based on that answer. When you are saying we need to cut back a little bit, we need to make sure that we can edit the game, are you involving the whole team? How do you make those decisions?
So one of the other interesting things about this game is how passionate the entire studio is. So it's really because, even, I don't know about you, but there's been many times in my career that I've been really surprised by the fact that some people just are not they're there to do the work, but they wouldn't want to come to a review meeting or something like that. And do you know what I mean? That happens. And with Dreams, like everybody is really involved. So it's been a really different process because there's a lot more to listen to and a lot of feedback to parse. And so definitely and particularly also because we've got some people who are making like the content every day, and then we have a whole bunch of people who go home and just use it.
Oh, that's great.
Just at home in their like relaxing time. Like we don't ask them to do it. And so they have very different feedback. And so it's been a really creating this as a tool, and it, effectively is like a game engine in a way. Like that means that we can't respond to absolutely everything, because ultimately 50% of people might want the default to be X and 50% of it want it to be Y. And if we just keep going back and forth, then you just go back and forth forever. And so, at the moment it's like we listen lots, but we have to make decisions and know that like that doesn't mean that everyone will always be happy with that their default hasn't been chosen. But, ultimately at that stage it becomes like we need that evidence that it's really, really needs to change. So definitely we're involving, the studio are really involved. But at the end of the day, the buck will stop with us as directors, and we have to just make that call. And I like to think at some point I'm able to just go, we don't have the time, or no, like well, that's where I'll have like the battle with Mark, our creative director, will be like, I really want this thing. And I'm like, no, we've got to ship it. It's usually Alex though, really. It's like, I can't drop that thing. And I'm like, but we've got to ship the game. So, yeah.
So how would you describe then the culture of Media Molecule?
It's a highly collaborative culture. Definitely one where we, everybody there is a maker of some kind, like the entire studio, whether or not they're making the game or they're making a garden or making, like everybody is that creates things. Everyone has a great sense of humor. I think that's kind of what binds us together. It's one of the things that is a real, it's a real molecule. People laugh easily, which kind of helps when you're wanting to collaborate, because it's, when you're collaborating, you kind of want that moment where you're all just riffing off each other,
right,
and not just immediately being like no, because that's when the energy is, that's when it's hard to kind of to riff, basically. So we have that. It's just a bunch of really great individuals who just are really bloody talented, and from all over the world. We've got like 26 cultures. It's very tolerant, it's diverse. It's great. I'm actually thinking about the people rather than answering almost the culture question. I think culture is just
culture,
people.
right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think with culture, the thing that, it's multi-generational now also. We've got people ranging from like 18 to in their 50s.
Okay.
It's kind of the first time at we've had that range. And I think that a culture is something that is cultivated. It's not static. I think that's probably been one of the biggest lessons that I've learned particularly over probably the last 5 years, is culture. You never like arrive at culture. It's something that like every day changes, and like people are human, and like really human things happen every day. And, everyone's kind of living their own little mini epic. So it's just that kind of, I think we kind of all have that interest in each other, that like it's great to be able to have the opportunity to work together.
Well, I love that statement. Human things happen every day. Yeah. What a great vision statement.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's not your vision statement, but it's
so true.
Very apropos. Yeah.
Yeah.
So will you talk a little bit about how many different cultures and nationalities you have at Media Molecule? Mm-hmm. How have you seen a direct impact on your games?
Yeah, totally. I think, we've always invited the fact that people their personality should shine through.
Yeah.
And I think we see the impact of, people can't, if you give people the opportunity to do great work, to do the work that they're proud of, aspects of their personality will shine through.
Right.
And so it might not be, as an Australian, there's not that I'm suddenly got g'day everywhere in the game. It's not that kind of thing, but but there is there will be different things that I will represent, because it's just me, and I am many things. And I think that's one of the things that I personally, that's one of the things that I love about making games, and I love about meeting games creators, is it just, people sort of come to the craft with like all these years of just living, and all these ideas and sort of cross-section of interests of games, or maybe sport or technology or theater or reading, or I don't know what, animals, whatever. And when given the opportunity to just express themselves, they can. And that so I love it when you see that. So I get really excited about that kind of, I really want to see like Frances's vision in the game. I want to see Emily, make characters that represent her, or she loves in some way, Maya. And, so yeah, anyway, I'm getting like really gushy, because I think that's one of the things, like you never want to you don't want to stop that. You want to find a way to channel it and really be able to see these wonderful people's work in our projects.
I think you've not only done that, you've created a platform for the world to do it. Mm-hmm. And I remember being so impressed with all of the user-generated content that I was seeing with LittleBigPlanet, and how I could just go to, it seemed like millions of worlds out there that people had just poured their personalities into.
Yeah, it's so cool.
And so looking at what you've already shown for Dreams, it seems like that's just going to supercharge this opportunity for user-generated content. Oh my God,
totally. I think the different ways in, like everyone has their own way in, but the tools are so playful and powerful at the same time. And one of my favorite bits of them is and the thing that kind of has taken the time is almost getting animation, logic, sculpting, sound, art, all under one UI. And what that offers is the ability to move between those different disciplines. So you can seamlessly move from creating a piece of music to then creating the visuals to go along with it, creating a piece of gameplay, and then adding, changing the environment to adjust the mood, or setting up trigger zones. So you move between them. So it means that you're never bound by one particular thing, and you can get into that kind of serendipitous, happy accident sort of flow that we were hoping people could get into, which means you never really know what you're doing when you start, which means that people will be able to express themselves in completely mad ways. And we see that already. Like the content that the team are making at home is just really, really sometimes really weird. Sometimes, sometimes it's just like really fun arcadey games. Sometimes it's like really emo. Like it's just, you see just through this like tiny, little, it's just us at the moment, but you see that and you're like, wow, I can't wait to actually see what other people do, because, we see from the community, people are sort of sending what their ideas are going to be and they're already thinking, and it's like, oh, I can't wait to actually see these things.
Well, I have another question along those lines. I personally grew up in an era where user-generated content didn't really exist. Mm-hmm. And I know my assumption early in the games industry when I was starting out was that most people wouldn't actually participate in creating their own content other than maybe hardcore mod creators. So do you think generationally we've seen a big shift in terms of more and more people getting into creating their own stuff?
Oh, totally. I mean, when we first started Media Molecule, so 2006, MySpace was like one of the touchstones, which I really loved MySpace. Sharing music's a really fun thing to do. But it sort of just shows how long ago that was. Because since then, the sort of on what we called, I think it was like the digital handmade revolution in one of our little videos, was like, that's kind of just happened. So you got things like, even things like, you've got Etsy, which is this wonderful place for people to be able to go, share the crafts that they've made. We had this, obviously there's been like YouTube and Facebook and, but also just, things like Pinterest. There's a lot of people just share what they make and what their taste is a lot more than ever before. And I remember during the first LBP, the most common question we would be asked was, do you think people will actually create things? And that is just not a question that gets asked anymore. And obviously Minecraft was like such a huge, massive player in that world of getting people really just accepting creative gaming and just tinkering as a thing. And, there's always been things like The Sims, which is a wonderful way of people getting to build. There's been a lot of games that have offered that. And you look at Fortnite with crafting, I think that it's just young people in particular, they have grown up knowing that feeling that's a norm. Right. That's completely normal. And so it feels weird for me now to think, there's teenagers, who have had that experience. So then they will never question whether or not you should spend time mucking about digitally, because they've done it and they've enjoyed it.
And do you feel that there's far less reluctance to share what your creation, no matter how rough or primitive it is?
Yeah, well, I mean, that will be the thing that we'll see, because I think still what we will never, ever know is how many levels sat on PlayStations and LittleBigPlanet that were never published.
Yeah. I know a few of mine did.
Right.
Were never published. So,
Well, that's the thing. So, we don't know really the answer to that. But I think generationally as well, there are a lot of people are excited to share what they're making. And, I think it's really fun. Like there's a lot of meme fun things that people can make, and but there's no pressure to. If you don't want to, that's fine. You can just make it for yourself. I think that's one of the things with Dreams, that like the act of creating is playful. Yeah. And so it's not really the point. You don't actually have to share it to enjoy it, but lots of people enjoy sharing. So that's the thing. It's it's sort of up to the individual what they want to do, and
that makes sense. When I was playing LittleBigPlanet levels with my kids, who were totally into 1, 2, and 3, I always wondered, what does Media Molecule do to curate content? How do you ensure that what is going up is something that you would support and something that just feels right for your studio?
So from the community, the beauty is actually that when the community are creating content, they publish it, and then the community itself are often the people who are the ones that, they sort of like the content, and they're the ones that almost promote what their favorite content is. With LBP, we had the picks, and so we would find things that we liked in particular, and we would put a new one of those out really regularly.
But by the way, I just have to ask: once things got going, how did you manage to go through all that content? Because I imagine it must have been just hours and hours and hours of looking at stuff? Or were you relying on the community to just sort of bubble things up to the surface?
Yeah, we were
for you?
relying on the community, but also people within the studio just loved playing the game and having a look. It was always so... It's one of those things that, with LBP, and the same will be for Dreams, is that we want to see what people have made. And we because the most interesting thing is when you see that people have used things in a way that you just never imagined that they would. And that happened with LittleBigPlanet all the time. But we've always really had strong community management at Media Molecule. And so that's one of the areas that we made sure, we were very lucky with LittleBigPlanet to have James Spafford come on, and he and Tom Kiss, they had actually made a fan site for LittleBigPlanet, and we saw that and we loved it, and we realized we needed community managers, and so Tom and Spaff joined us, and basically they were very passionate about the community, and so they really helped us navigate those waters and make sure that we were finding people and connecting, and Spaff was just brilliant at just sort of getting to know everybody. And that's again what we're doing with Dreams, is making sure that community management is as important as any other of our disciplines within the studio. And it's really, really, really important once we get to, working with the community.
Yeah, I imagine given how much your community is growing, how much more interest there is in user-generated content, it's going to be even more important, right?
Yeah, they are, because that's the lifeblood. They're the community are the most important. They're really important, and we need to take care of them and make sure that we're responding to the needs to their needs.
Sort of a non sequitur here, but when you think about what could be created with Dreams, is there something special you want to see? Something that you hope somebody will create, whether it's a short film or a piece of music that
I think the thing I keep thinking about is because there's no real genre limits, you can move between genres, you can mash up genres, mix them up. That I sort of want to see something that is, where you look at it and you're like, is it a music video? Is it a game? Is it a story? But you realize it's all of those things. That's kind of one of the things that I'm really interested in, is just actually seeing people create completely new types of games, and actually that being something that kind of helps us even understand more about the medium itself. And that's one of the things that I love, because it's the industry itself is also not static. It changes all the time. And our understanding of what we, if any of us sort of looked 20 years ago, 30 years ago to think of what games would become, the industry's changed massively. And so I think it's sort of seeing, when it's just about sort of content and creativity, and you can put whatever you want on the screen. I just want to see what that is, because it might surprise us as to what that is.
Oh, I think
do you see what I mean?
I totally get you. I mean, when you said that, I started thinking about how we as developers derive inspiration from lots and lots of different places, but to be able to look at a community like the Dreams community and derive inspiration from whether a game or something like a game or something like a play or a song is really cool. Yeah.
And I think collaborations, that's the other thing. I'm really interested in months after, we launched, sort of starting to find out who's collaborating with who, what collaborative relationships have been born from Dreams.
Do you think you're going to maybe be the genesis of several new game studios?
I hope so. That'd be so cool.
Yeah, it really would
that'd be great. And, certainly the idea of you know what it's like when you meet people that you collaborate with well, that's a really special, cool thing. So that happening would just be brilliant. And, I think that's definitely, with LBP, we had a lot of people who played it who then went on to become game designers. And actually the majority of our games design team are ex-LittleBigPlanet community members. Because they know it the best. So that's why we hired them. So we shipped LBP2 with a lot of community members within the studio. And hopefully, with Dreams, that's also I'm sure from that, we will meet a whole bunch more people and hopefully inspire a whole bunch more people to just use it. Because I think of things like, there's a lot of amazing tools out there already. Brilliant ways to learn how to make games. But what I like about Dreams is it's on the couch, it's playful, it's sort of deceivingly, you can sit and play it and then realize that you've actually learned a whole bunch of things. And I'm hoping from that we just, we make people understand the process a bit. Like I've learned a lot about like animation, for example. I've never animated anything prior to my time using Dreams. And I remember the very first thing that I animated, I was like, oh, right. Yeah. Like animation's really hard. Like you really understand how gifted like animators are, but also how fun it is and how you could just get lost in that and develop it as a hobby and want to keep doing it forever and ever and ever. Same with music. Like I've kind of learned so much about making a song and not like the theory of it, but just the playfulness of it and actually using your senses. Like a lot of this is using your senses, like using your ears and your eyes and like being able to like get a sense of like, I like the look of that. I like the sound of that. Doesn't really matter if anyone else does. I do. So Who cares? And that's actually a really liberating thing. And I don't think that I've done that for a really long time. So I've kind of learned myself a lot about the craft that I've been doing for a long time, but Dreams has given me a different way into it also.
That's really
kind of mad.
No, it's great to hear.
Yeah.
And I will back that up by saying that I think the design principles that one can learn from putting together levels in a game like LittleBigPlanet are incredibly valuable. And one of our designers at Insomniac, his name is Josh Lehman, and he designs crimes on Spider-Man, got the job at Insomniac because he put together a LittleBigPlanet level.
No way.
Yes.
Oh my God.
With Insomniac.
That's amazing.
I think he created either the Insomniac Museum or which we usually have in our games, or our Insomniac office in a very playable, very well designed LittleBigPlanet level.
I love it. That's so great.
Yeah, it was
really,
super cool.
really cool. That's really cool. I love hearing that story. That's really good.
But so I want to talk a little bit more about just production, because you run production at the studio, and you have said that you've talked about glitter and doom.
Oh, glitter and doom.
I love that. I love that expression because it's so true, right? You've got a roller coaster ride constantly. So how do you maintain balance yourself in this roller coaster industry?
Well, I really like trees.
Okay.
So I go visit the trees very often. I think actually it's a really good question. We have I guess one of the things that I remember learning at Criterion was the fact that like we have to feel like we're making the game better every day. And the times when I get down, when I'm in the like doom part, is the times when I feel like we're not making that progress and we are kind of in the middle of the middle. But then another thing that I learned at that same time sort of kicks into action, which is like don't do tomorrow what you can do today. And so I think it's like we can actually create change very quickly. So for me, it's like the balance from. Do you mean balance like? What do you mean? Just the balance of
staying sane.
Staying sane,
really.
Yeah, for me, it's just I have to feel like we're moving forward. And the times when I feel that, when I sort of am in that doom phase, is when I don't feel that's happening. And I think it really just gets me going when I feel that. So the balance for me comes from the problem solving that happens, and actually knowing, like being liberated from the fact that like it's never the end of the world. I think that's one thing that we will have to remember. Like it really, really isn't. And the problem that we feel so deeply, we have to be able to zoom out and go, you know what? I just need to go take a break. I need to go for a walk. Like that's what I'm saying about the trees. Like I have a beautiful dog. I have a great partner. I will definitely lean on them when I need to have those moments. I have like weekends where I'm like, I just can't speak to anybody this weekend. I'm just going to like hang out with Barry and Anouk and go to the trees. And that's kind of where I get my downtime, is sort of just, allowing myself to just disappear into the loveliness of nature. But in the studio, it's about, I don't feel like I feel like, I have to I just have to keep it moving forward, basically. Right. And, that's and knowing that is actually possible and there's not really any problem that's unsurmountable. It's just about like first naming it and going, that thing there is a problem. And once you've done that, it's almost like that's half the battle, is actually recognizing like this elephant in the room. Let's just name the elephant. Like, let's not dance around it, because then you feel so much better. And that if the team feel like you're addressing problems, then they are less anxious. If the team feel like we're not addressing problems, then everything feels difficult. So I'm quite open about the fact that when there are problems, and I do like surveys and things like that within the studio of like so I do like a full studio one every few years, which I'll probably do one soon, where I just ask people questions. Obviously in a survey, that's what one does. And then and I have a trust with the team, which means that they are really open with me and honest. And that from those, like if there's things that we need to address, we do spend the time addressing them. So I think part of it for me is knowing that like the job is going to have problems and there are going to be points where there is this glitter and doom. But if we accept that that's part of the process, then that allows it to not feel too overwhelming when we're in those moments. And it's great to have people to talk to, like that's when it's also great to be able to, this is why this industry is amazing, because people know that everybody's been through that. So it's really easy to be able to call someone up and go, oh man, I'm in that moment, help me. And they do.
It's great to have that structure. I mean, that pure structure you can rely on. But something you said raised a question for me. And that's a question I have trouble answering is, why do you think people are afraid to talk about the elephant in the room?
It's such a good question. I think because it's sometimes scary to admit that things aren't going well, or to admit that there is this problem in the game design, or there is this problem within the studio. It's hard to because I think people just get scared that it won't be solvable. And I guess I come from the perspective of like everything's solvable. Like there's no problem that's not solvable. There's no problem that at some point we will find a solution. It might not always be the solution we want, but they're solvable. Like let's move through that. I guess that's why I do the job I do, because I like problem solving.
Right.
So, I mean, that's one of the things. So I recognize that some people are really scared. So it's part of my job to tease that out of people so that they are able to share the problem.
Do you spend a lot of time coaching?
I spend a lot of time like talking with the team and looking at the game with people.
Okay.
Yeah. So in that way, yes. And I think as we move, as I was saying earlier, like we've moved to this like multi-generational team, and we have a lot of people who've been with Media Molecule for like, we're 12 now, but people have been with us for about 10 years, and they're really taking on way more responsibility. And I definitely want to be able to spend more time with them to kind of help them sort of through their new roles, because, it's one of those things you kind of get used to figuring out how to do a demo or figuring out how to do this. It's really teaching me how used to things we get and how actually a lot of people have to learn those things. So yeah, probably not enough coaching going on, but that's my intention to do more. Well,
I think what you're talking about is coaching, right? When you're setting an example by being able to bring up the thing that people don't want to talk about. I mean, it's a great example for others who are in leadership positions. Mm-hmm. And that's just me sort of spouting my own philosophy, but I commiserate. It's very difficult to help people understand that it's okay to talk about the things that are going wrong. Yeah. But it's expected too during development.
I think it's like one of those things, like every now and then I'll get a bit, I'll be like, oh, I'm having to be like bad cop all the time, or I'm having to be like the one that's like, okay, we've got to talk about this thing. And then I think, Siobhan, get a grip. Like that's your job. You've got to do it, and you've got to do it so that people know that happens. Because I know that the hardest points of any project I've worked on have been these things, and they're the thing that if you don't address them, they will be the thing that kills you. And you need to make sure that and that doesn't mean I can't profess that actually this happens always at like, breakneck speed, or that like problems don't happen. There's tons of things that that go on where I'm like, oh God, I wish we'd solved that earlier or whatever. But at the same time, there is good intent. So yeah.
Which is incredibly important, right? If your team knows that everybody is in it for the same reason.
Yeah.
And is everybody's thinking positively, even though things may be crashing and burning around you.
Yeah. And it's not even about crashing and burning. I think one of the things about games development is that there's just like a bajillion problems to solve.
Yes.
Like the whole process is like just make it up. None of us know what it's going to be like at the end. And it's a really weird industry because it's like none of us know what's going to be like in the end. We have to talk about it we talk about it all throughout the process, but we really it is all an experiment along the way. And I think like that embracing of the problem solving nature, I think that's why game developers are really interesting people, because ultimately people are inventors, and they're willing to sort of, jump off the cliff and presume their wings will grow, and not being frightened of that. So it's like, you have this very, very interesting set of people who are kind of creative risk takers.
True.
And, so therefore, I think that it's really important. And actually, as the industry grows, I think it's really even more important. The last Glitter and Doom talk I was doing was very much about the fact that the more we expect from people, the more we actually have to be aware of their needs, and more we have to sort of be aware that they will go through this cycle, and we have to make sure we're there for them, and that we are aware of what it is that they're putting to our projects.
Do you think that the industry is hearing that message in general?
I don't. I mean, I hope so. I hope that I think we have to get used to the fact that the games industry is not going anywhere.
Right.
It's every year becoming more interesting and bigger and different, a more diverse sort of set of games out on the table, more diverse group of people making them. It's not going anywhere. So we have to chaperone it on, if you get what I mean. We have to make sure that we're comfortable with that, and we want it to have a future, which means bringing people with us.
Right.
So I think that idea of managing people, cultivating a culture, understanding a multi-generational workforce, looking for diversity, all these things are all things that, they're the things that we know today. In 5 years' time, there'll be different things that we'll also be worrying about. And I think it's really important for us as people who run studios to be very aware of that, and to be excited by that, and be interested in that.
Well, I see it. And I love the fact that there are many conversations going on about diversity and inclusion within our industry.
Yeah.
And sometimes I look outside of our industry and I don't see those conversations happening, which is, I guess, good news for us and bad news for everybody else.
Yep.
But maybe that is our obligation to speak louder and reach out beyond our industry to others.
That's true. And actually, I've always thought that the industry is very forward thinking and progressive. And that's one of the reasons why it's so quick to be right, yes, we do need to put efforts into diversity, it not be a tokenism. Yeah. And I think that's been really, you look around, and I think that that's actually it's really heartwarming to actually see the really positive things that different studios are doing and projects are doing. I get very excited when I hear and see us taking what we do seriously, and not so seriously that we're totally po-faced, but at the same time, it's really, it makes me excited when everyone else is looking to the future and kind of looking at how we can look after our wonderful teams and keep more people coming through the pipe, and making sure that there's lots of interesting people wanting to come and make games and wanting to take the industry in places that we are yet to think of.
I totally agree. And you look around here at E3, if you go over to the Indiecade section, you can see it in spades. And it's awesome. Really neat to see people who are, I met 5 students who are here showing off their game, and just decided to come up to E3 and show it.
Great.
And it was a really interesting game too. It's nothing I'd ever seen before. But
that's really amazing.
But it's happening all over the place. Yeah. And it's happening not just in America, but worldwide.
Yeah, worldwide, completely. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing you see with the indie game revolution, has kind of just been absolutely amazing. And to see now that that was one of the things that I feel at some point people were sort of scared, and of how that would affect AAA or what, I don't know, or there'll be these divide or whatever. But you look at it now and you're like, well, it's just I love that every type of game, every type of creator, there is a place for everybody. And we learn so much through seeing like raw expressionism that comes from young people are just the best. Like, I mean, I love everybody, but like all ages are great. But like in particular, like there's that point, I don't know if you remember being like 15, 16, you're just so like, feel everything. And like, everything's just at that point where you just, when you express it so purely. And that's what's so amazing to see young people of that age have our medium as the medium they choose to create with, because you're like, wow.
Well, I can imagine Dreams is one of those opportunities.
Yeah, I hope so.
Really, I mean, not just for young people, but for people to express their selves, how different they are from others in a way that's purely their own. I can't wait to see what comes out of that.
Oh yeah, same. I can't wait. I think also like there's an age where you, as you're getting older, so where, after you go to college and you start your career, like people sort of stop doing some of the creative things that they did when they were young.
We start to conform a bit.
Yeah. And then what I like is the stories on Dreams, who are people who've been through that. And then Dreams has enabled them to start doing something again. And that something kind of ends up developing into something else. And that's really interesting, because we forget to play, and people get so scared of like, I can't pick up this paintbrush because I'm not going to paint the best picture in the world. And, that's where as grown-ups, we put so many constraints on ourselves and we become inhibited. And I like the idea that Dreams would sort of help people pull down those walls a little bit.
Fantastic. I can totally imagine that. That's going to happen. No question.
Yeah.
So a couple last questions for you. What advice do you have for that 15-year-old who's out there listening to you right now and saying, I want to do what she does?
Just do it. I think when I was 15, I was really lucky to have great role models. And my role models were all sorts of people. And they were women musicians and filmmakers and writers. And I grew up in an era where there was brilliant, there was a lot of amazing women in bands. And I remember seeing them and never ever always thinking I could do that. If you get what I mean? Like that, there was never a moment where I have an amazing family and always had a structure that was like, whatever you put your mind to, you can do. But I was also like a ragey teenager. So like, when I look back at the things that I was creating at that time, I had encouragement. I had to get it out of my system. And my advice to anyone that's 15 is like, the future that you want, you can have. You just got to get on with it. Like, you can do it. And there will be moments where you have to do the grind and, assign like 1,000 bugs in one night, which means going home really late. Like you just have to do it. And like, that's part of the job. Like part of the job is that you actually have to just crack on, keep practicing. Doesn't matter if you fail a couple of times. You do have to work hard. You do have to be nice to people. You do have to strive to do really high quality work. All of that's there, but when it's your hobby, that makes it easy.
I think that's great advice for anybody, regardless of age.
Thank you.
So, if people have more questions for you, how can they reach you?
They can reach me on Twitter. So I have a Twitter, Siobhan Reddy, and they can. They can become part of your community. They can become part of the community. Good point. Yeah. They totally become. they can become part of the Dreams community. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Well, Siobhan, thank you so much. Thank you. That was really fun. Absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for the Game Maker's Notebook. For more information on the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, our podcasts, and our other initiatives, please visit www.interactive.org.